I'll hand over to you.
Thanks very much, Tracy, and welcome everyone. My name is Alex Garrick, and before I get going, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land where I live and broadcasting here from Canberra, the Ngunnawal people and their elders past, present and emerging. Thank you once again for attending tonight's webinar. I'm looking forward to a really lively discussion, and I'm very fortunate to have four extraordinarily gifted people to join me tonight, and I'll introduce to them one by one. First of all, we have Renee Wilson. Renee is very well known in the veterans community. She's the wife of a veteran. She's also the CEO of War Widows New South Wales, and she's been heavily involved in the Royal Commission herself as a witness during these proceedings. Next, we have Jennifer Collins, AM. Jennifer is a former colleague of mine at the Department of Veterans Affairs. She was the head of DVA New South Wales for a very long time, and it has an extraordinary amount of knowledge about veterans, and her care for veterans goes without saying. She's one of the most passionate people I've met in terms of veteran welfare. Next, we have Simone Reid, who's a member of the board on Fearless. Simone herself is a veteran. She has vast experience in dealing with issues relating to PTSD. She's also been on the board of the veterans, the Female Veterans and Veterans Family Policy Group, which has been run out of the Department of Veterans Affairs. And she's also had quite considerable experience in terms of the commission proceedings. And finally, we have David Templeman, AM. David was a highly distinguished public servant with careers in defence and also Emergency Management Australia. And he's also had a number of recent experiences around health and mental health support services in particular, and is also a member of the Fearless Board. Now, before we start, I just want to make a couple of quick observations. Tonight's conversation is not about the picking the pieces of the Royal Commission itself, where we at Fearless have been very supportive of the Royal Commission, and we acknowledge that they're about to deliver a report, I believe, in September. The discussion tonight is not about predicting what's in the report or critiquing any part of that process. We don't have any prior knowledge of what might be in the report. What we are interested in, though, is the issue of mental health and PTSD set in the backdrop of the Commission, and some of the issues that have been raised by the Commission and what we might do with some of those issues moving forward. I do understand that we have members of the Royal Commission who are attending tonight, and I bid you all a very warm welcome. Also, can I say that all the views and expressions that the panel might say tonight are their own views, not necessarily the views of Fearless. And just to reinforce one of the things that Tracy said, if anything we talk about tonight is triggering for you, please make sure that you receive the appropriate support or assistance tonight, because it's very important that you do that. Okay, we'll crack on. Now, I need to sort of put my own bona fides out with respect to this issue. I've been a passionate supporter of veterans issues for many years, not only from a personal sense. I'm a former Army reservist, and I've met many people during my time as an Army reservist who have been through the veteran system, who've suffered PTSD in particular. And one of my ambitions in my career as it moved along was to be involved in veterans support management. I did that through three different areas. I was the Chief of Staff to the Head of Personnel in Defence for a period of 2 years. I also was a Senior Advisor to a former Defence Personnel Minister in the previous Labor government. And for the last 6 years of my career, I was a senior public servant in the Department of Veterans Affairs, dealing a lot with reform of the veteran system. So, look, I could probably say that I may have been part of the problem myself. And certainly, when I first joined DVA, it was said to me by a number of people that veterans issues is one of the most, or veterans affairs is one of the most difficult things you can do. And throughout my 6 years, I really railed against that comment, because it shouldn't be difficult at all. In fact, supporting veterans should be the easiest thing imaginable. And as a historian, if you look back at how the repatriation system was developed as a result of the First World War, it was all about providing the best support possible for our diggers who are coming back from overseas, from the First World War. How that's developed over the decades has been quite problematic. And one of my major issues, I think, when I left DVA, was the frustration that I felt that the system went away from the initial intent of what the government had done back in 1917. And that is that we had a system which was basically a claims-based system where people, particularly those who are coming back from overseas service, have to prove that their injury or illness is service-related. And that has caused a whole variety of issues relating to claims processing, the time taken to process claims, and the impact that it might have on people who are suffering mental health and PTSD. So that was the main issue for me. And certainly from my perspective, when I was the CEO of Fearless, and I just recently relinquished that role, the submission that I made to the Commission was very much around that issue, was what is the actual philosophy behind the veteran support system? Is it time to move away from a claims-based system and look at different models for delivering support? So that's my segue into the discussion tonight. But what I might do to start is ask each of the four panelists what have been their initial views about the Commission in terms of the key issues that they've seen being addressed so far. So I might start off going from left to right on my screen. I might start off with Renee first.
I always get picked first. Alex, before I get to that, there is one thing I just wanted to mention. It's a really important observation that you just made about the intent of the repatriation system. And today in evidence at the Royal Commission, Karen Bird provided evidence of a Royal Commission inquiry in 1924. And believe it or not, it's all the same issues we're still talking about today. And in that, she quoted that the intent of Parliament has been clear. It has been to cover the disablement of veterans. But we still, and I think when you take that in context, we still struggle with what that actually means. And we create all of this bureaucracy and red tape, which goes to the claims process that you just mentioned, that actually makes this really difficult. And for 100 years, it was really sobering to listen to that today, to go, hang on a second, have all we have actually done over 100 years was make this harder at every step of the way. It was just to pick up on that earlier point. And that Royal Commission took place in 1924, so in between World War I and World War II. And to think that we weren't even getting it at that point, despite what the Parliament intended when they set up the repatriation system, is quite mind-blowing. Broadly, I think the Commission has done a couple of things. A lot of us who have worked in this sector for a long time have understood that what we think, or what the hierarchy of defence or DVA or anyone in a senior leadership position thinks is happening is very different to what is actually happening on the ground. And I think the Royal Commission has made that abundantly clear to everybody. And they have made it clear to the general public. They have made it clear to the media, whether they choose to report on it or not. And unfortunately, they've held up a very difficult mirror to a number of senior executives in both Defence and DVA on that exact fact. They're struggling to find who is the accountable person when it comes to the problem or the prevalence of veteran and defence suicide, as is everyone watching. It actually looks like a football match. If you were to sit back and to watch all the evidence back to back at every point, in particular the last hearing block, where the same series and themes of questions have been put to senior executives in both departments, one more to go on Thursday, all you see is a handballing. No one actually taking accountability, no one actually taking responsibility. And it's incredibly disheartening. As a family member, as being part of an organisation that represents and supports family members, as being the civilian on the outside of the system, who exists within a system where if I don't take accountability for something that goes wrong in my organisation, I'm out the door. Yet we continue to reward poor and bad behaviour and a lack of leadership and a lack of accountability within our broader veteran system. I think the other thing that it's done, though, is also provide the community sector with access to information that it has never had before. So when you're working in the veteran community sector, trying to get information out of any body that you might be a part of, or DVA, or government, is incredibly difficult. And this also includes the consultative framework that sits within DVA. Getting any information about what's actually happening, how do I connect with people, getting access to research has been incredibly difficult. Over the last 3 years now, I think we have had access to more information than what we have ever had in this space, which has allowed organisations with the will and the capacity to take lessons learnt and to start implementing change now and not waiting for the outcomes, because we already know what the issues are. We've worked in this space. There will be no surprises for people that have worked in this space. The challenge for us as a community sector is to uptake our role, hold our politicians, hold the system accountable after this Royal Commission, because I think we have spent too long resting and we've been part of the problem to get to this point. I think that's all I've got for now, if I was to sum it up.
Great points, Renee. And and I go back to what you said about Karen Bird's evidence today, and it is quite remarkable that the same issues keep coming back all the time. And that would be, as I said, I'm a great fan of the Royal Commission and very supportive of what it's trying to do. But as we said, a lot of the issues that have been raised in this context are things that we all know about, that have come out in other reports, such as the Productivity Commission review into veterans issues. So what is it that's stopping us from making progress? And that's, I think, something that I know that you're extremely passionate about yourself, Renee. So thank you, Jennifer. I guess this, in your experience, having been head of New South Wales and looking at a whole range of issues, including claims processing, what are some of the key issues you think have emerged from the Commission? Are you on mute, Jennifer?
Always on mute. Look, one of the positive things I think that has come out is actually families and individuals have finally been able to share their stories in a very comfortable place, because traditionally what happens, the department is reactive because a veteran appears in the newspaper about X, Y, Z. So I've been really pleased to see that people have come forward and telling their stories. Now, from that, I do hope the Commission is looking at emerging issues and what's trending out of those conversations, because as painful as it has been for people to appear, I wouldn't like to see that wasted. So it is important we do that. Look, a couple of other things I thought about. Yes, you're right, Alex. The department has been very much claims focused, and it's a bit more complex than that. And if you look at how their performance is measured, they're measured in times taken to process and how much they spend on health. There is actually no outcome measures that certainly in my time ever appeared in the annual report or were ever actually tabled in Parliament. So it's around how long it takes to process a claim, be that an injury claim or be that access to, say, a healthcare provider. So I think there's some things that I'd certainly like to see going forward. But as I said, positive that families have finally got to say their stories. And let's hope that they take on board whatever the trends are in those conversations.
Yeah, I agree, Jennifer. And on top of that, I think this is an appropriate time to give great credit, particularly to the mothers of veterans who did commit suicide, and the amount of work and effort and that they put into getting the Royal Commission established. And I want to acknowledge one person in particular. Hope she's watching today, and that's Nikki Jamieson. Nikki was very heavily involved in that process, and she's done some amazing work since then in the veteran space. So thank you to those people. I might now move forward with Simone and just ask you to give your initial impressions.
Thanks, Alex. I suppose I can lead on a little bit from Jennifer's comments. Things that I like have come out of the Royal Commission or the conversations that I've had is definitely the whole community approach is looking at how community can come together and actually then create a better system on how we move forward. I really like that people are able to tell their story and their lived experience and have that safe support network to be able to do that. Do I think that the Commission in the initial stages could have done things a lot different and I think a little bit better? Absolutely. Do I think that there's lessons to be learned from how it was established and some of the information that's been brought out? Absolutely. But in a way to be able to move forward, I think connecting veterans, community, family, and actually igniting that space is just so important on how we move forward. But I love the fact of making sure people are held responsible and accountable for what happens next. So I hope that this isn't the end of the conversations. I hope that this is the beginning of the conversations, because I think there's much more to be said than just in the hour that we have, or just less of. So that would be what I can see so far.
Thank you. And I'll get back to your issue around community in a moment, because I think that's a really important issue. But first, I just might finish off the initial conversation with David.
Thanks very much, Alex. And I just want to open this up. I might sound a bit provocative, but I think we do have to be, there's a big issue of expectation management out there, I think, given what's been said about starting this commission off in the first place. I mean, what's the positive Royal Commission news going to be for veterans, their families and friends and community? And I don't know, what that might be and what it might look like at the moment. But certainly, I mean, I asked the question myself, will the Royal Commission evidence compassion and highlight the critical sort of importance that, future dealings and interaction with PTSD sufferers must be through the genuine lens of looking at a health issue, but on the understanding of it, what are the potential downstream consequences that lead to some disastrous sort of outcomes? That really involves switching this thing from an individual issue to one of developing an appreciation of the totality of the impacts in a much more joined up and collaborative way. And so I'm sort of really worried about making sure that we do this in a which emphasises the need for the Royal Commission, hopefully, to have looked at health priorities and the associated level of investment seem to be so critically important, which is mentioned before this thing started, and more importantly, coming around to the issue of prevention as well. And I can say a bit more in a minute, Alex, about just how we so underscore how much of just in the health budget alone we spend on prevention, which is absolutely minimal. So they're my opening remarks, and I can say a little bit more about what I've said to emphasise some of those points in a minute. Thank you.
Yeah, look, thanks, David, and that's a good segue into, I guess, into some of the things that we might discuss next. I mean, one of the key issues for me is that there's no greater issue for a government than making a decision to go to war, and that has a whole range of implications, not only for the country, of course, but for the people who fight it. And one of the frustrations for me is that we send our men and women overseas to contribute to a coalition force or to fight a war on our behalf, but we don't seem to be to take that, as you said, the preventative measures or the forward thinking about how we're going to deal with that cohort when we get home. And it strikes me that everything in the system is about making it harder for them when they do come home about reintegrating into a normal life. And I just feel that government, and I'm not talking about one political party or the other, but government in general has escaped review scrutiny, I guess, in this process. I'm just wondering what people think about that, whether or not we need to be putting more pressure on government to focus more on those aspects when we do make that commitment to go to war, to focus, on that aspect as much as all the other things that we need to do in the planning and preparation for a deployment. So, what do people think about whether or not the governments in general have been under the scrutiny that perhaps we think they should be? And I open up to
I'm happy.
Yeah.
Leading on to what I said earlier on, Alex, is that, I put it really to decision makers in, well, Defence and DVA, and there may be other agencies that need to be included in this mix. But, they clearly need education, but they also need to demonstrate the respect that the sort of the critical issues around the social and sort of the economical sort of determinants of health, how they actually really, participate and play their part in terms of PTSD and what leads to dreadful sort of consequential outcomes. So there's a really need to have a meaningful focus on what I would describe as multi-sector collaboration across the whole of the community health and wellbeing area, and which so that they also get an understanding of the necessary linkages across issues such as homelessness, trauma, drug and alcohol issues, the physical and mental health issues, family and employment, and domestic violence. They're all the things that come into play here when you're dealing with, the worst cases, and quite often not necessarily the worst cases, but these are critical issues. And I don't know whether the Commission has it out been and talked to these areas that deliver this service on a regular basis to the community, but without the directions being added into them as well. But has it investigated this sort of stuff? I don't know. I hope so, because it's the only way they're going to get a real mantle on what the need is out there and how it goes about it. And DVA and Defence leadership need to know this so they can actually communicate that in a positive way to their workforce.
No, good point, David. Thank you. And that probably sort of points me into the next question. I might hand this one over to you, Jennifer. You and I, when we were in DVA, we talked a lot about reform and how we could get the services better to the veteran. One of the things that I think the Commission needs to look at about is that dynamic between Defence and DVA and who's responsible for what. Do you have any broad views about that and where we might see some developments moving forward?
Just leading on from David's point,
Yeah.
we've got a system that's reactive. Someone has an acute episode. Someone needs an admission. We actually don't look downstream and say, okay, what are the things that will prevent or reduce the chances of this individual having some mental health need into the future? So we really need to start to think downstream about the health promotion side, which I don't think we do. The second thing is we haven't done is we actually don't say to families when someone joins the Defence Force, let me tell you what it's going to be like, what support these individuals may need. So I think that those two things are important, health promotion, but we've also got to have family and community support around the individuals when they're healthy. Not when they're already needing some, active mental health support further down the track. So I think from my perspective, I'd like to see the Commission focus around those aspects of around health promotion, prevention, and certainly early intervention.
Yeah, okay, good. I think one of the things that leads from what you've just said, and Renee, I might hand over to you this because we're talking about this before, is the impact on recruitment and retention. And I think it stands to reason that at the moment there's a view, fairly or unfairly, that Defence doesn't manage their people well. And if you go back to, and I worked in Defence Force recruitment, and one of the basic tenets, I think, is that we always said in recruitment was you need to get the parents supportive of you joining the ADF, that parents are the most influential influence on the potential recruit. I see when we're talking about veteran suicide, when we're talking about all the problems in the system, I see some issues, obviously, how it relates to recruiting and retention. And there is a recruiting and retention crisis in the ADF at the moment. Renee, I'm interested in your views about what must be done to alleviate some of those pressures.
It's very simple, yet it's as complex as we need to fix it. Because I think, again, Karen Bird today said it perfectly. When they sign the defence contract, they have to believe that we will have their back. And in my view, we as a collective, as a system, have been letting down veterans and their families for 100 years because we haven't been holding up our end of the bargain in the way it was originally intended for us to hold up the end of the bargain. And this goes back to that social contract theory. And I think there's an inherent tension in the Royal Commission in the sense that it could be giving a perception that veterans are all broken, that their families are all broken. And it's certainly not the case for the majority of people, but that ought not get in the way of having these hard conversations. Because if we don't have the hard conversation now, and we don't take this as a wake-up call to fix the problems in the system, then we're never going to fix recruitment and retention. Because how are people going to have the confidence? How are people going to know that Australia will have their back, that Australia will demand accountability when the system lets them down? And it's time that we, as Australia, stood up and started demanding that accountability all across the system, because the way the system is today is not good enough. The way that leaders are able to skirt accountability and handball it off to other people is not good enough. The fact that veterans are dying from what are preventable deaths is not good enough. The fact that families are suffering and are in extreme grief because of what this system has done, because war can and does come home to them, is not good enough. And we need to do everything we can now to fix this system, because when we fix the system, we're providing the confidence to that next generation of veteran and family member, that next generation of parents to say, serve your country. And I reflect on my husband's service. It has been the best thing for him. His service in the Defence Force gave him everything. In his words, when they kicked him out, it almost destroyed him. We need to fix this system if we're going to fix recruitment and retention.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And look, again, I go back to what we say to recruits when they join, that, we will look after you in effect from cradle to grave. Now, that's a huge responsibility when you say something like that. And I guess some of the feedback that's always come back to me from people who've been medically discharged is that, and this may not be the case now because I've been out of the system for a couple of years, but people have said to me, we joined the armed the ADF on that basis, and then as soon as something went wrong, we were told to leave Defence and then deal with another organisation. That's not exactly what we signed up for when we were told that you would be looked after from cradle to grave. So I think that's a really important issue. And of course, when you've got a high employment situation like you do at the moment in Australia, the ADF always struggles to both recruit and retain. So you need to be able to give them that extra bit of assurance that if you are joining us, we're going to look after you. And I think those are very important points, Renee. Simone, I want to come back to you because I know that you're passionate in your interest in the issue of families and in the ADF in particular. And I know that you've discussed this at various conferences that we've held, etc. But I'm interested in your views about where you see the positive or negative impacts of the Commission moving forward in terms of families and what you've seen so far, and what you think needs to happen moving forward around the families issue.
Thanks, Alex. I think in regards to the Royal Commission, with some of the lived experience. And with talking with a fair amount of people who have made submissions, is that they went in with it alone. Like, they started their submission, whether it was face-to-face or written, and some of their family members didn't even know that they were going through some of this. So I think that that's, you know, kind of that the fact that they come home as a veteran, you come home and you don't even talk about that to your family. Like, talk about those distresses, talk about what happens, and it takes a Royal Commission to say, hey, we want to hear now. You know, that those conversations should be early on in the stages within families and communities and with groups. And I really like Jennifer, that reactive type system. That's exactly what we've got. And to air David's approach, that we do have to look at our health system, because when people do come back and they do talk about what their, issues or what their stoppers and blockers might have been in service, we actually don't have a support network to assist them. Like, the fact that we have to go see a GP, make a long appointment, get a healthcare plan, but through that, there's a whole heap of money, and then DVA will suggest that you get $6.95 back to support the $210 visit to a site that only lasts for 6 visits. Like, this is, there's lots of topics and issues in there, but I really think that to address some of the issues, we need to go back into the family and community unit. So if people don't have a family, then they will have a type of community that they can connect to. But it's giving veterans and people and family the actual opportunity to have a look at what they've got and where they can tap in to create those support networks. So we might not be able to solve some of these problems straight away, but I think as NGOs or non-government organisation, non-for-profits need to be able to collaborate, come together and actually create support systems where people can go to straight away as soon as they feel like they need assistance, if they don't have that set up.
Just on that point, if I may, Alex.
Yeah.
So what we have to rely on is volunteers, advocates, to help the veteran negotiate a system that's been put in place for them. I mean, that's a fundamental problem with the system. You've got to rely on volunteers.
Yeah.
And they do a fantastic job, don't get me wrong, and have done it for many, many years. But that in itself says a lot on how we value the service given, that we send them off to a volunteer to put a claim in or negotiate the system on their behalf.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and this is an argument I frequently had when I was in DVA. If you had the perfect system, you wouldn't need them.
We don't have social workers in defence. We don't even have social workers in defence for people to come to. So they're that key trained network of people where defence don't have a system in place to actually engage with social workers or people even within. So Jennifer, I absolutely agree with that. A broken system just to start with.
Yeah. Before I move on, and I want to ask David a specific question, but Renee, just on the family side, with anything you'd like to add to what Simone has said?
Just a cheeky plug for the fact that at War Widows, we're changing our name to the Families of Veterans Guild. And Simone and Jennifer, you've hit on the exact gap that we are trying to fill in the system. And it's about providing skilled, trauma-informed help, not only directly to the family member, because we know it's most often the family member that's dealing with the emotional and mental load of what's going on. And in this system of defence and veterans, they are never seen as a priority. If they themselves are a veteran, they have better standing than someone who isn't a veteran, because the system does see them in some way, shape or form. But if you are a civilian family member, no matter your relationship to a veteran, and you are trying to access government, good luck. If you are trying to access the veteran system, good luck. And so my cheeky plug is that is exactly the gap that we at War Widows New South Wales / Families of Veterans Guild will be fulfilling as we build out our new future over the next 12 to 18 months.
Right. And, I think that's as I've said to you before, Renee, I think that's a fantastic direction that your organisation is taking. David, I want to come back to you just on the issue around a community-led response, I guess. And I think one of the things that I've noticed quite a bit in my time in Fearless is how governments sometimes get caught too much in their own processes in terms of delivering support to people, and we tend to forget that there is a community-based model out there, community-based organisations who are delivering support every day. They may not have the same level of funding or resources, but they're doing a good job in within their particular remit. I'm just wondering whether that's a model that we look to more and more as we move forward, more of a community-based model for delivering support to veterans. What do you think about that?
Thanks, Alex. And I think and picking up what Simone said, I think this is the only way to go, because sometimes people think that veterans have got a whole access to a whole lot of other services, which is just not the case. And I think the opportunity through this Royal Commission will get lost, for instance, from putting on my public health hat, that I worry that has the Royal Commission really looked at things like our total health spend in Australia and just how small the amount of preventative investment there is. I mean, we spend about $250 billion a year on health in Australia and that's about $10,000 a person annually. But guess what? Part of that in preventative health, it works out to only $89 of that $10,000 is spent on prevention. It's 1.34% of the total health budget. I mean, this is just ridiculous in terms of, and I would just only hope to God that that the opportunity will get lost if the Commission hasn't really focused in on that, looked at these sort of things, and said, how are we going to work together in a preventative health point of view, but more importantly, how will these people get access to these services that the rest of the community is crying out for as well? I mean, you only have to relate it to the fact that, there are 5,500 domestic and family violence calls annually in Australia. That's 1 every 2 minutes. And 85% of them, those calls don't even get reported or they're followed up and stuff like that. So these are serious issues that, I'm not saying, and the veterans community is affected by this just as everyone else in the community as well. So I really think there has to be a much more clearer understanding. I come back to my point I raised about leadership being educated, understanding how this whole network can be brought together in a much more collaborative way to work for the betterment of not only veterans, but the whole of the community. They are part of the community. And I worry that this commission might be too focused on just a stovepipe mentality around veterans issues and not looking in a broader sort of, community, broader context, if you know what I mean. So that's
Absolutely.
where I'm coming from.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Now, one of the issues that we haven't talked about, but it's a very important issue, and one of the questions that we've got relates to this. And thank you, Barry, for asking the question. And I'll get anyone who wants to respond to this. And we haven't talked about transition, which I think is obviously one of the most important issues in respect to mental health, is managing that transition focus properly. Barry has, and I know Barry quite well. We linked in together in LinkedIn, and I've read his book, and it's an extraordinary read. But I just want to give a little bit of his question. I'd like to see the D for disorder removed from trauma, PTSD, as this can numb hope. And thirdly, I'd like to see changes in the training of psychologists where a more veteran-informed, attuned and accumulated approach is encouraged through the transition process. What are your thoughts? Now, particularly in respect to transition, what are some of the things that we can do better as a result of what we've heard in the Commission and what we know anecdotally about the transition process? And Renee, you know that I'm probably going to start off with you with this one, given the work that you and I once did on transition ourselves.
Yeah, where to start? I think it was, again, said beautifully today by Karen when she said they administer veterans. They is in the system. So
Yeah.
you're not treated as a human. And I think the work that we led, Alex, on the transition task force really highlighted the fact that it is an administrative process and an administrative approach, when in fact what the issues are that are coming up in transition for people are issues of identity, of meaning, of purpose. And it might have taken this long, since 2017 when we first found those, and we tried really hard internally to have the senior executive listen to what we were saying, both in defence and in DVA, and indeed the Minister's Office, as you well know, Alex. We tried really hard to have them hear us on this issue. But the mindset at that time was a successful transition equals a job, full stop. And that's, of course, not the case. And so it might have taken until 2024, but I am now glad that those issues are being seen, that issues relating to identity and purpose, and helping veterans and their families understand that it's not a linear experience, it's not a linear process, it's not an administrative process, and that it in fact is a journey, and it's actually about refinding that purpose, refinding that identity when you're on your way, you know, when you're looking at leaving the Defence Force, because it isn't just a job, it is your entire life that is shifting. And it is, there's another book, it's called Life is in the Transitions, and it talks about these things happening in our lives being a life quake, like an earthquake. That's exactly what transition from the Defence Force into civilian life is. And the way that that happens, whether it be medically, administratively, or voluntarily, or perhaps some voluntary ones that should have been medical or administrative, can also have a much larger impact. What was the second part of your question? Because I just had one other quick point to make on that around transition. Oh, the D and disorder.
Yeah.
Just picking up on David's point, and it will be provocative. And so I apologise to anyone that I offend with this. This is my personal view. And it is my personal view as someone who has lived with PTSD myself and has recovered myself, and is still recovering from PTSD. I don't think removing the word disorder, I think it's just playing with words, because it is not normal to be in a state of post-traumatic stress. It is not normal. You can recover. And I actually think that if you remove the word disorder, it almost creates a normality to that state. And what I fear is that people see that then as a life sentence. PTSD is not a life sentence. You can recover. The challenge is finding the right therapist, finding the right types of therapy. The challenge is doing the work and going into the trauma to come out of the trauma. But you can come out of the trauma. So I think removing the D from the PTSD is just tinkering. It's not actually going to help in the bigger sense.
Thanks, Renee. I noticed that Jennifer's got your hand up.
Yeah, one of the things I've always thought about transition, it's a process the veteran goes through. The family don't actually go through the transition, so they don't begin the journey of what it's going to be like for my husband or wife or partner to transition. There needs to be a process of where family understand what this transition is about, what they should be looking for if there's any issues coming up, and involving the family from the day the decision is made to transition the person out of defence. And I'd like to see some work in the Royal Commission around the value of including families in that process. Renee?
I think that the joint transition, that's the one of the things that the Joint Transition Agency is focused on. Is that right, Renee?
Families are invited to the seminar.
Yeah.
That's the extent.
I mean, obviously, I think that's something.
Oh, and there is a guide.
Right. Yeah.
There's a guide that has the word family in it.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah, I think it's logical though what Jennifer said. It has to be done. I think you need to have better engagement with families, and all the successful transitions I've seen have been where the veteran and their partner have done it together. and I think it's common sense.
Just to add in there, sorry, Alex, I just
Yeah.
want to say transition starts at enlistment. It actually
Yeah.
starts with the family alongside of them.
Yeah.
And it's not something that just happens at the end or when you get bad news or when you have to leave for some reason. It needs to be a process through. So regardless to whether it's when you do a course, that it's actually properly administered, like on your PMPs correctly put in, or then it's transferred to a civilian. Sorry, I've got kids in the background. But it needs to start at enlistment. It shouldn't be something that happens with 5 years before you plan to get out. It shouldn't be any of those things. It really needs to be a focus that when you join, you actually have a whole heap of things that happen, but your family comes along that journey, whatever that family makeup looks like.
Yeah, no, absolutely agree. It's essential. Just a couple of other questions here. One from Dean. Hi, Dean. Do you think as a result of considerable submissions to the Commission regarding alternate therapies to support veterans in a similar way to the NDIS, the psychotherapists and counsellors registered with their respective professional associations like PACFA and ACA will be funded to support veterans? Will therapies like equine therapy be funded as an option for veterans? Now, I'm also the deputy chair of Animal Therapies Limited, which obviously focuses on animal-assisted therapy. I think we've come a long way over the course of the last 6-7 years. So to answer to your question, I think along the way, I think we will get there. When I left DVA, they were just talking about assistance dogs, and now it's something that that DVA has embraced more, and I think it's becoming more prominent in the whole issue around animal-assisted therapy is becoming more prominent. So, answer your question, Dean, I think we will get there. Still a long way to go. Anyone else got a view about that?
I think we need to get there.
Yeah.
And I think,
I believe we will.
just picking up on David's point before, what if a crazy idea we spent $10 out of the $10,000 budget on prevention? Like it's honestly, I think these things that are seen as alternative there is actually an incredible amount of evidence behind them, and it's about connecting people with the right tools that work for them in the way they work for them. Meditation, for instance, volumes and volumes of research behind it. But is there any funding in the system for veterans or their families to engage in any meditative-based therapies or therapies that help you meditate or access the technology that help you meditate? No.
Yeah.
I think we actually have to get there. It's not a question of should we. We need.
Yeah, exactly right. And I think one of the things that I've, talking to veterans over the years that frustrates them is that there can't be the list of things that help them is an exhaustive one. And one of the things that I've found is that, we talk too much about, these are the things that we'll accept. But every veteran's different. Every veteran's got their own way of coping with mental health or with their PTSD. So I think the system needs to be more encouraging of that and more open to different therapies. And in my time over the last 3 years being involved in ATL, I've just seen extraordinary things being done by people using animals to help them. I think it's a fantastic way of dealing with a growing problem. So look, thank you for that question, Dean. And as I said, I'm encouraged that there will be further developments on that. Kevin's got a question. After 20 years of asking for help, it wasn't until a self-harm attempt in 2019 that I was admitted into a mental health hospital. It was there that I first heard the term of advocate. Why do vets have to rely on volunteers helping us? We've talked about this already, to navigate the system whilst an entire department is in place that should be doing the job. And I guess, as I said, we have talked a little bit about this. But Jennifer, coming back to you, is there anything else that we can do about the advocate system that might assist us moving forward?
Well, I think the advocate systems probably have about 35 reviews.
Yeah.
Every couple of years, this issue comes up. They call in an expert to do the review. they have some recommendations or some outcomes they want to achieve, and we just continue on. The other problem we are facing in the advocate space is most of the guys that are currently doing it are Vietnam veterans.
Yeah.
Now, these guys are in their late 70s, early 80s. Is this model the right model moving forward, or should it be a more professional, sorry, that's the wrong word, a different approach to how they advocate on behalf of the veteran? I don't mean the legal system. I wouldn't like to see the lawyers get involved, but there are other departments who have similar models, for example, immigration, and have a look at what the advocate role is there. And I think maybe it's time the department seriously thought about funding advocacy programs.
Yeah, I agree.
And the best advocate's always going to be the family.
Yeah.
So is there a model there? Enough families have presented before the Royal Commission. They've seen what the impact of service has been on their loved ones. So maybe it's time we looked at a model where the families are actually funded, trained and funded to be the advocates.
Yeah, no, good point, Jennifer. Thank you. We are running a little out of time. I just want to go to each one of you to just give you the opportunity to say one last thing. What is one point or one key point you think moving forward that needs to be done to help improve the support to veterans? And hopefully that will arise out of the Commission. So I might go from right to left this time, or left to right this time, and start with Simone, who's on my furthest right screen at the moment.
Okay, well, I'll back the community every time. I think it needs to be a whole community approach, whole government approach. I think that non-for-profits, NGOs, we've all got to start talking together. It's not about cutting people's funding or anything like that, but it needs to be a collaboration piece to be able to work together to actually get results. There's a lot of organisations that are doing things separately. That's not a community approach. It needs to be coming together and actually making good decisions for veterans and families to be able to get good, good services. Just help. We need to be able to move forward with this. Yeah, I love the name change too, Renee. Well done.
Thank you, Simone. David.
Thanks, Alex. Look, I'm very much in the court which of Simone in this context. I mean, with the experiment of it being left in the leadership of DVA and Defence has not worked one bit, and they need to be challenged over this whole thing because this is a serious issue whereby that there has to be a focus on leadership and accountability, preparedness to act, and the commitment in terms of that prevention issue I discussed before. I'd like to see issues that come out of this whereby National Cabinet makes some decisions around this and PM&C and other key agencies are dragged kicking and screaming into a situation whereby the onus is on them to work together in conjunction with organisations like ACOS and other organisations and things like that really know what goes on the ground. It can't be just left that DVA knows about it or Defence knows about it. They are part of the family, so as to speak, in terms of fixing this mess up. And on top of that, they get a benefit out of all of this because hopefully if it can work in that sort of way, the community can feel confident that it's now really not in the hands of, two people who've actually failed in the process, if I may say that. We're not talking about absolute failure. But the point is, though, that in terms of recruitment, people joining the organisation will know how they'll looked after if something does go hellishly wrong and what the reference points will be throughout that particular process. So I'm all for sort of seeing something take place pretty immediately after the Royal Commission's recommendations come out, because I think the community will be wanting things to happen and they'll want some reassurance in government about what the next steps might be, and it'd be better be different to what it is at the moment.
Yeah, and if you go by most Royal Commissions, as I said to someone the other day, you can't expect that things will remain the same. And so I think all of us look forward to whatever recommendations come out, and hopefully it will improve the system better than what it is at the moment. Jennifer.
Look, I think everyone has articulated quite well the things that need to happen. But for me, I really would like to see a stronger focus around family support for veterans. And I mean family support both as parents and so on, but I also mean that community support, so that the system is wrapped around the veteran and their family moving forward. So yeah, my big focus really would be, I'd like to see some very positive things come out about how we can support families in this space.
Thanks, Jennifer. Renee.
Two things. One of the first thing goes to this point around community, and I want to see community ownership of the problem, because there's one piece of evidence that keeps rattling around my brain that was given in this last hearing block by the Chief of Navy, and he said, we didn't think it was our problem to solve, we thought it was DVA's problem. It's 2024. It's 2024. We have been dealing with this issue for 100 years in this system, and there has been no ownership of the problem across the community. We're very tempted to say, don't look in our backyard, look in theirs. No, we all need to look in our backyard. I think taking ownership as a community of this problem and taking responsibility for our part in it and looking at what we can do with the evidence that's already been provided before the Commission will make a significant impact. And again, a bit provocative, but I'd actually like to see us not have a DVA claims process and in fact invert it, flip it on its head completely. It should actually be everything is accepted but for this amount of conditions where Defence Service could not have possibly ever contributed to their onset or their deterioration. Full stop.
Yeah, well, you just stole my thunder, Renee, because that's exactly what I was going to say. My one thing is that regardless of the Commission or government or whoever it is, we need to completely review the claims-based system. There are better models out there. The people who disagree with that say that the other models cost a lot. But I go back to what I said before. The biggest decision that any government will make is going to war. And if you're doing that, then you must take full consideration of the impact that it's going to have on those people you are asking to fight that war for you. And I think it's a no-brainer for me. I'd like to thank everyone tonight for your attendance and also your participation. It's been we could have gone for another hour. It's been one of the best webinars I think I've been involved in since being in Fearless, which brings to my next point. This will be my last involvement with Fearless. I've recently not only resigned as CEO, but also from the board. I'm moving on to other things. I wish all the best for the new CEO, Paul Milne, and the board for its future endeavours. I will always be involved with Fearless in some manner, but it's been a fantastic 6 years. I've made some fantastic friendships, and I wish everyone all the best. I also want to wish the best for the Royal Commission. Commissioner Nick Cowdis, I think, has done an outstanding job. I wish the best for him and his team as they finish off this process and deliver the report in September. So with that, and again, my final thing, I respect veterans so much. I understand what some of you have gone through. I hope that as a result of this process, your lives will be better, the support that's given to you will be better, and that you live superbly fulfilled lives because you deserve it. So on behalf of Fearless, I want to say good night. One more thing, because Belinda Neal, my good friend, would kill me if I didn't mention this. The next webinar will be on the 8th of May. It will be on leadership within organisations to prevent and minimise PTSD. It will involve our new CEO, Paul Milne, also Grant Edwards, a very distinguished person and who's the author of the book, Who's Protecting the Protectors, and my friend Esther Mackay, author and PTS activist. So look out for that one. Should be a fantastic webinar. So on behalf of me, behalf of Fearless, behalf of the panel, thank you everyone, and we'll see you all soon. Bye now.